here. So we were going through what are the functions of the law. Laws give us rules of conduct. They provide a system to enforce that conduct. They protect the rights and freedoms of individuals. They protect society, and they resolve disputes. We've talked through establishing conduct, providing ways to enforce. For example, I had a website here. This is an old one, but for example, Warman RCMP tired of distracted drivers. In this article, officers discussed the new anti-texting laws. So that tells you it's a little bit dated, but they found that they were unenforceable. So that's a conversation to have about laws that are created. If you can't easily enforce them, then a law is useless, right? And so how do you tell if someone's texting versus, picking up something that they dropped on their console or something like that? Rights and freedoms we're fully aware of. In our free and democratic society, laws protect those rights and freedoms. Laws encourage the values of tolerance and respect. In Canada, we have basic freedoms such as freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. These rights can't be limited unless there is a solid legal reason for doing so. And I guess this is the conversation that people have been having for a number of months. We've talked about that when we learned about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that there can be reasonable limitations, right? Reasonable restrictions, and who determines that? Well, the courts determine that. Courts play a big part in that, in establishing what is reasonable. For example, if your freedom of expression does not allow you to harass or verbally disrespect somebody in your school, that's part of protection there, so we'll read about that further. It also protects society. Laws intend to protect the whole. Some of our laws exist because it's a threat against society, not just a threat against an individual. You could write that on your page. If we're talking about assault, if we're talking about murder, that kind of stuff, yes, it is one victim that is included in that, one perpetrator, but the idea is that the threat exists to all. There have been a number of domestic assaults at the rental property beside mine over the summer there. It is a threat against the people that rent at my property. Just because they aren't involved in that doesn't mean that threat can't bleed into affecting them, or just seeing that kind of violence and stuff like that we don't want. So protection is for society, even though it's only individuals. At James Smith, there are 4 people that we know were involved in that weekend shooting, for example, but the threat exists to all society that we don't allow that kind of behavior. Criminal laws are designed to protect people from harm. Our society defines what we consider wrong. It sets out punishments for people that break the law. For example, we have criminal laws that prevent you from carrying an unlicensed handgun or beating up your neighbor. Civil laws protect individuals from harm or being taken advantage of, individual to individual. For example, we have labor and occupational safety laws that protect you from harm when you're working, things like that. Like, for example, mines, or I think it was even the Children's Hospital when it was being constructed, somebody died because safety measures weren't being followed. That falls under civil law damages. And then the last part, that is the function of the laws that it resolves, are disputes. It is to settle the conflicts that do come up. Disputes can be settled through negotiation, through court systems. Laws help create order. It ensures that disagreements are resolved fairly. For example, if you went on someone's property without the owner's permission, then you could be sued for trespass or damage, like we read about those trees, right? Okay, in your handout again, you have some space to fill out. I think we've filled out the characteristics of law. We've already filled this part out.
I don't have that.
Do you not have that? Oh, I think we continued reading instead, right?
Yeah.
Brody, write that down.
Wait, what?
Do something.
Characteristics of laws are that they have to include a mandatory element, they're enforced by government, and they involve consequences, right? And then you have functions of law on the next page. And there are 5 of them. I could just say that you could make your own notes based on your text. That would put the work on you. You want to establish rules of conduct. A guide for individuals. So we have laws so that there can be rules of conduct that everybody has to follow. You want to provide a system of enforcement so that it can be resolved and dealt with. To have meaning. So this relates to something you guys brought up this morning. For a law to have meaning, you have to enforce it. So, for example, you say that the Lordborn students just kind of, everyone wore hats so that they could overwhelm the system, as an example, where there was a threshold that the staff would have to decide to stand firm on enforcement, or they let it go, right? Laws also protect rights and freedoms. I'm not sure that, we talked about this when we've done grade 10. We talked about that there were 5 safeguards to freedoms and protections for individuals, not just up to politicians to make sure that the laws they make are valid or don't harm individuals, but it's also up to opposition leaders and parties to hold government accountable or individuals accountable. It's up to the regular elections that you have that lets people have a say in whether they believe a government is being accountable. It's up to the media to make sure that what's happening is transparent, and there are all sorts of different media groups that work to do that. And the Supreme Court of Canada. There's one thing, if you follow American politics at all, there's the idea of stacking the American court system, where if you have a Democratic or a Republican president, that can appoint a new person, a new judge to the Supreme Court of America. And if the idea is that they stack it with either more Republican or right-wing leaning judges versus more Democratic, and it depends. People have to retire or pass away, and it's a big deal, right? In Canada, we don't have that question, because it doesn't matter if it's, Stephen Harper appointed, I can't remember if there were 13 Supreme Court judges, and he appointed 7 of them or something over his long term in government. It doesn't matter which party has put people up to the Supreme Court of Canada. The cases that those judges decide on has always been decided on the law and not on left or right ideology. So when we talk about protecting rights, as an example, Supreme Court of Canada is one of the main protections of this. Of rights. And it's not biased by politics, left or right.
Is this point number 4? Is this part
I left a space so that I could write laws protect your rights. Bless you. Bless you. Laws protect your rights. You are free as long as you don't infringe on rights of others. And an example of that, which I don't know, that this Supreme Court of Canada concept is the one that gives me the most faith in the system, because these people are untouched by politics there. And there have been many studies where law societies or people have studied their court decisions to see, is there a bias to left or right side, depending on which government or party elected them to that position there. And there isn't. There's no evidence of bias at the Supreme Court level. And everything is filtered through the Supreme Court, right? Question?
It says that you are free as long as you don't infringe on other people's rights.
Yeah.
Does that apply to everything?
Well, it is the balance. And so, we've talked about, for example, that you would have the right, if you wanted to gain access to medically assisted suicide. Yeah. And you would go to your primary physician, for example, and say, look, I want this. That medical professional may have, they also have freedom of conscience and belief. If they have a religious background, for example, and they don't believe in a medical professional supplying or assisting with that, they can say no. So there you have someone whose right can affect your ability to have your right recognized or whatever. So there's a conflict. And that conflict went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they had to strike a balance. So what's the fair or appropriate way for that balance? Well, the balance that what they've come to as of now is that that medical professional does not have to facilitate your assistance in dying, but they have to connect you with the professional who will. So you still have your right respected, and they still have their right of conscience. They weren't the one that actually facilitated it. They just had to make sure that you were connected with someone who would. And so that's where there can be the compromise. And there are all sorts of examples of compromise. And actually what they're talking about right now with medical assisted suicide and dying is, and it's come up in the conversations I think in the French debate, they're looking at this idea whether adults, parents, can request medical assistance in dying for their kids. If you have a kid that's very young, a child, for example, that's suffering, or if you can also get medically assisted suicide for depression, for mental health reasons, which up until now had not been accessible for people.
When did that be approved?
What's that?
When was that approved?
No, it's part of the discussion now as they continue moving forward and developing this progress or program, right, of how you do or don't. Yeah. So it's about finding, it's the balance, right? Balance between people's rights. Another function of the law, like it said, was protecting society. It's mostly that these laws work as deterrents, that the consequences hold you from committing these kinds of offenses. Protect people from harm. And 5 is resolve disputes. And we know that they arise, to settle conflicts. Or you can negotiate right? I don't know if you recall, it was, I think, 2 years ago when there were issues with fisheries people in the Maritimes, where there were Indigenous groups that had, fishing rights, for example, and fishing, what would you call them, like a building, a fisheries building, for example, to facilitate their catch and that kind of stuff. Sure. And, well, whatever you want to call it, along the piers. And non-Indigenous people were angry about the rights given with Indigenous rights, and so they were setting fire to these buildings. There was conflict between non-Indigenous fishermen and Indigenous fishermen, and it was in the House of Commons that they made the comment and said that this has been settled by law. This is not a new conflict among people. The law has already been set and established, and so you would negotiate through the courts. Okay, so I think at the bottom, this just tells you that this first unit that we went through, these are the outcomes in the new curriculum for the law course. Your purpose here was to evaluate the purpose and the function of law with societies. And you wanted to look at the way that the worldview of a society affected its organization of law, both historic, older and new. And you looked for examples of way that law was a part of everyday life in Canada, and we did that as well through many examples. So that is the first section.